Field Engineer Guide to Going Up the Building. Vertical Control Transfer in Construction. I'm excited about this video because this is a huge topic and it gets done wrong all the time, and we've got to get back to doing it the right way if we're ever going to be successful. What I'm talking about is bringing up horizontal and vertical control up the building. Let me start by telling you a story. There was a massive high-rise in San Diego, and we actually had inside intersecting baselines, which worked out great. All of the control worked out beautifully all the way up through 5 floors. And I'm not trying to blame somebody else. This is just telling the story accurately. I never want to become that guy that's embellishing on stories, so I got to keep it accurate. So I got done training the group and then went back up to LA where I spent most of my time. And they got up to levels 7 and 8 and called, and they're like, Jason, we're out of whack. Things are not lining up. So you know with post-tension that it will compress and deform the decks, right? It'll like wrench the decks and it will skew. Whenever we scan the decks, it's interesting to see what they do. Sometimes the decks like literally shrink from side to side. They will actually skew. They do all kinds of weird things. And so after a couple of floors, the control, because they were going from floor to floor, came in by up to 2.5 inches, and they were in big trouble. And I was like, hey homies, we have got to always plumb down to the first level. And then I also gave them a backup. I said, let's say something's in the way of your sleeve. You can set up out here and sight down here at the bottom, and then rake it up and check the edges of the decks once you have your control. And you can do that on all 4 sides if you want to. But the primary method of going up the building is through sleeves. When you have your base level, let me see if I can draw this in perspective. I want grid systems on here to where we can take 2 points, and then when we do the upper floors, I can literally plumb up through a sleeve. Okay, that's going to go all the way up. And then when I'm on this upper floor, I can establish these same grid lines. And these same grid lines should match up on the edges. So if you are sighted, you could sight the bottom and sight up, and it will match. The point is, if you're up here on these upper levels and you've got these 2 sleeves, you've got to plumb all the way back down here to the base. You've got to plumb all the way back down here at the base. Otherwise, it will drift. You can't go from floor to floor and compound. And yes, you can have these outside double checks, but this is the best way to plumb up through a structure. There's also ways, and I'm just going to do this in plan view, like you know in concrete they use tattletales where you have formwork and they will have a certain offset and they will let a string fall either to adobe or a plumb bob or a bolt or something that weighs it down, and they know what the offset is, so down at the bottom they will literally measure how far that string is off of the face of the form, and so they know if it's plumb, right? That kind of concept inside of an elevator shaft, I like to have inside the inner decking formwork of that core openings to where you can plumb all the way from the base all the way up that elevator shaft and make sure that that core is plumb so that it will accommodate the guide rails for the elevators. The other thing that I want to talk to you about is, and I'm just going to do this in simple non-perspective 2D. Let's say this is your ground floor and you want to bring up elevations. Now you could come up here and put your level rod through the hole and do a level loop on the floor and establish benchmarks, but my favorite way of doing it is to find a way to chain up the side of the building or chain up through a core, or if it's a steel structure, chain up on the outside of a column. And my favorite thing to do, and you all will think I'm crazy, but everywhere I've done this, it's worked out great, is to chain up through the tower crane. Now, tower cranes do move, but it's not enough when you calculate the movement to where it's going to be very much difference in the vertical distance. So the tower crane, let's say that's a 4-foot offset above finished floor. I'll just literally use a calibrated chain and mark that 4-foot offset all the way up the building. That's the best way to do it. But you can't, again, take measurements from floor to floor, 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 and not expect there to be some massive elevation problems. The best way is to simply chain up the tower crane, chain up the vertical steel column, chain up the core, or chain up the side of the building to the edge of the decks in a proper manner. And when you're using the chain, you got to make sure you're not going to have sag if you're doing it vertically, but I'm going to say no sag. You've got to adjust for temperature. and you've got to make sure that you have the right tension. I looked recently, Brandon Montero and I looked, actually Kate Schroeder and I looked. We used to have those little tension handles for fish. You know, you just hang a fish off of it. They still sell those. Chaining clamps are hard to find nowadays. But the bottom line is, if that chain, that steel certified calibrated chain, that steel tape, says you need to have 20 pounds of tension, you better have 20 pounds of tension, especially if you're chaining vertically. So in summary, what you're not supposed to do on YouTube is you've got to plumb through sleeves all the way to the ground floor, and for elevations, the best case scenario is to chain up through those sleeves, or chain up the side of a tower crane, or chain up the side of your actual steel columns. And if you're using steel, you have to adjust for temperature, because those buildings do, before they're conditioned, expand and contract. Be very careful, but know the math. It's very clear. It's in the Field Engineering Methods Manual, Construction Surveying and Layout. I'm going to turn this into a blog post. This will also become a chapter in our book. And if you need help, reach out to us, but never, ever, ever go from floor to floor, floor to floor, floor to floor for either horizontal or vertical control. I hope you've enjoyed this video. On we go.